A storm gathered above the royal estate that stretched along the misty coast of Northern California, where cliffs dropped sharply into the Pacific Ocean and the salt-laced wind swept through the sprawling grounds of the Alaric Palace. Hidden within its cold marble halls and manicured gardens, the heartbeat of a secret pulsed louder with each passing day. The prince, Cassian Alaric, was a shadow in his own realm. Young and sharp-eyed, with a jaw set by duty and brows knitted in quiet rebellion, he wore the weight of the crown not yet his. Cassian was raised behind iron gates, taught to see everything but feel nothing. And yet he did feel, deeply, destructively. But only for one. She moved like a whisper through the palace corridors, the hem of her worn dress brushing stone floors, eyes always lowered, always watching. Her name was Elira. No one remembered hiring her. No one knew where she came from. But she had stayed, as if fate herself had tucked her into the fabric of the estate. They met in moments stolen from time. Behind velvet curtains during royal banquets, beneath the grand staircase while footsteps echoed above them, under moonlight in the west gardens where roses grew wild and untamed. Their hands touched only when the world wasn't looking. Their words were soft weapons, carving a truth that neither dared to speak aloud. It wasn't supposed to happen. Cassian was promised to another, an heiress from the East Bay, whose bloodline was traced through centuries of power and wealth. A match forged in boardrooms and sealed with champagne. Elira wasn't even allowed to step near the upper halls without earning the scorn of guards. But love does not care for marble columns or silk linens. It roots itself in cracked earth, in overlooked corners, in the space between glances. Still, they hid. 4 weeks. 4 months. A slip of parchment hidden in a bread basket. A silver cufflink found beneath a servant's pillow. A bruise on Cassian's wrist that looked like a grasp, a plea, a goodbye. One night, a storm hit harder than any in memory. Lightning split the sky in violent bursts, and rain pounded the glass like fists. Elira was caught on the west side of the grounds, soaked and shivering, her bare feet bleeding from the sharp stones. Cassian found her near the old greenhouse, the glass roof cracked and plants overgrown. He pulled her close, warmth against her cold skin, but someone saw. Just a flicker of movement in the darkness, eyes behind a curtain, a silhouette holding a candle. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. The next morning, she was gone. Cassian tore the palace apart with silent fury, avoiding questions, evading his father's gaze. He didn't eat. He didn't speak. The court whispered of illness. Some said madness. But then, a note. Folded 3 times, left beneath his pillow. If we are to be seen, let it be under the truth of the sun. She had written it in charcoal. That night, during the spring gathering, a ceremony of wine, music, and speeches before hundreds of aristocrats, advisors, and sycophants, Cassian walked into the ballroom alone. He stood on the steps above the guests, bathed in the golden glow of the chandelier. And he waited. The music slowed. The voices lowered. Then she stepped into the room. The torn dress was gone. But the fabric she wore now, though plain and colorless, did nothing to disguise her. It only revealed her more. Elira walked slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the still air. Some recognized her. Others only stared. She reached him, her chin lifted. Not defiant. Simply unafraid. Cassian took her hand. Gasps rose like smoke. He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. My name, he said, his voice steady, is Cassian Alaric. And this woman beside me is the only truth I have ever known. The silence was almost holy. And then, the silence cracked. A goblet shattered on the marble floor. A noblewoman in emerald stepped back with a hiss of silk. Whispers swept through the ballroom like fire in dry grass. Faces turned pale, brows lifted in disbelief, some even in disgust. But no one moved. No one dared interrupt the storm now unraveling in their midst. Cassian did not release Elira's hand. Across the room, at the far end of the high table, sat King Merrick Alaric, his father, flanked by dukes, foreign ministers, and the heiress Cassian was meant to marry. The king's goblet was untouched. His eyes, the same steel gray as his son's, bore into the scene with cold, unreadable precision. He did not speak. Elira's fingers trembled slightly in Cassian's grip. Not from fear, but from the crushing weight of eyes upon her, of centuries of law and order glaring down from oil paintings and family crests. Cashin moved forward, guiding her down the steps, each motion deliberate. "She is not my shame," he said, his voice rising just enough to press against the walls. "She is not my secret. She is my choice." Someone coughed. A courtier dropped a handkerchief. The music had long died. The king stood. Silence thickened. He did not descend the steps. He did not rage. Instead, he looked at Alira, not with hatred, but with the measured gaze of a man assessing a puzzle, a flaw, or perhaps, a threat. "She is a servant," he said, finally. The words were not shouted, but they carried like thunder. Cashin squared his shoulders. "No. She was a servant. She is now mine." Alira opened her mouth to speak, but the king held up one hand. The room froze again. "You forget yourself, Cashin," Merrick said, his voice smooth and sharp. "You stand here, throwing tradition into fire, wearing your rebellion like a medal. Do you understand what it costs to do this?" "Yes," Cashin said. "And I will pay it." "Will she?" I shifted back to Alira. She met the king's gaze. "I do not want your crown. Only the truth." The air changed. Not a crack of thunder, but the eerie stillness after it. The queen, silent until now, leaned toward her husband, whispering something none could hear. He did not reply. He only looked once more at his son, then turned and left the hall without a word. Gasps rose again, this time louder. The royal family had never been challenged in public like this. Cashin turned toward Alira, his jaw tight, his chest rising with a breath that finally felt full. He could feel the shift happening. Not complete. Not safe. But real. He stepped down onto the floor, pulling her beside him, weaving through the crowd. Some parted with stiff courtesy. Others watched with poisoned fascination. A few smiled, quiet, subtle, knowing. In the hallway beyond the ballroom, Alira exhaled and stopped walking. "What have we done?" she whispered. Cashin turned to her, brushing a curl from her damp cheek. "Something that can't be undone." Down the corridor, behind them, the music began again, hesitant, off-tempo, as if the palace itself didn't know what song it was supposed to play anymore. But in that moment, beneath the flickering lanterns and the scent of orange blossoms drifting in through the windows, they stood in the eye of the storm they had created. And something was coming. Something neither of them could yet see. In the days that followed, the palace held its breath. Whispers threaded through its walls like ivy, curling around every pillar and dripping from the mouths of servants, guards, nobles. Alira's name, once unknown and unspoken, now echoed in drawing rooms and dining halls. Some said she was a witch. Others claimed she had blackmailed the prince. A few, usually behind closed doors, said she was brave. Cashin did not leave her side. They walked the gardens in daylight now, no longer lurking in shadows. He took her to the west wing, where sunlight poured through stained glass and the ceilings stretched higher than treetops. He told the staff she was to be given quarters there, quarters no servant had ever touched. His father said nothing. Not a summons. Not a threat. That was what made it worse. Each day without a response was a coil tightening. Every formal event they attended together, every time she stood at Cashin's side in front of people who had never acknowledged her existence, the silence from the throne became heavier. On the fourth night, it broke. A letter arrived. No seal. No name. But Cashin knew. He opened it in the dark, seated on the floor by the fire in Alira's room. She sat beside him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The letter was short. "The council will convene. You will attend. She will attend. You will explain yourselves." Cashin closed his eyes. "He's going to force the court to tear us apart." Alira didn't flinch. "Then let them try." The council chamber was older than the palace itself, carved deep into the hill, lined with the shields of every Alaric that had ruled since before California was more than gold fields and dust. They entered together. Cashin wore no crown, no regalia, only black. Alira wore gray. Simple, clean. No jewelry. No ornaments. But she moved with a grace that did not belong to nobility, nor to servitude. It was her own. The council sat in a crescent of judgment, 12 in total. Dukes. Ministers. Even the High Chancellor from Sacramento had been summoned. At the center, the king. He didn't rise. Instead, he gestured to the center of the chamber. Stand. Speak. Cashin stepped forward, but Elira touched his arm. I will speak first, she said, to everyone, to no one. Then louder, because I was the one beneath your notice. I was the one you did not see. And yet you fear me. The room shifted. One of the councilmen leaned forward. We do not fear you, girl. We fear what you represent. And what is that? She asked. Chaos, the chancellor said. Unwritten order. If a servant can become consort, what stops the rest from rising? Cashin's voice cut in. Perhaps they should. The chancellor's mouth thinned. Elira stepped between them. You fear me because I am not bound by your expectation. You fear that a prince would love me when he has been offered your daughters, your heirs, your alliances. You fear that love can't be bought. Or bred. The chamber fell quiet. Then the king spoke. You would defy centuries of rule for this? Cashin looked at his father. Yes. And what if I strip you of your title? Elira didn't look at Cashin. She looked only at the king. Then you'll be left with a prince who obeys, but does not feel. A crown heavier than any head can carry. And a palace with no soul. The words were not loud. But they sank in like cold water. The king stood. And he walked toward them. His steps echoed. His gaze did not waver. When he stopped, he stood so close Elira could see the ghost of age in the corners of his eyes. He reached into his coat. Cashin stepped forward instinctively, but the king held up one hand. From the folds of fabric, he pulled out a ring. Not a royal crest. Not a seal. A plain silver band. He held it out. To love someone, he said slowly, is to risk everything. Even your name. Even your throne. I once failed that test. His eyes flicked to Cashin. I do not wish for my son to do the same. The ring rested in his palm. And everything in the chamber changed. Elira stared at the ring, her breath caught in her throat. It was simple, almost too plain for what it meant. But its weight was unmistakable. It wasn't about silver. It wasn't about power. It was a surrender. Cashin stepped forward slowly, not daring to speak. The king didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Elira, not in challenge now, but in recognition. I do not bless this union out of approval, he said. But because I have learned, too late, that what is forbidden by rule may still be right in the heart. And then he closed her fingers around the ring. The chamber held its silence. A single sound could have shattered the moment. But no one moved. No one breathed. Then Cashin reached for her hand, the one that now held the ring, and kissed her knuckles gently. Let it be known, he said, turning to the council, that I stand not above her, but beside her. There was no applause. No royal decree. Just a slow unraveling of tension, like a rope loosening after years of strain. Later, the storm returned to the cliffs, as it often did. But this time, it found the windows thrown open in the west wing, and laughter echoing through stone and glass. Elira stood on the balcony in a dress that still bore no jewels, her hair damp from rain, her cheeks flushed from dancing. Cashin joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist as they looked out over the ocean. We made it, she whispered. For now, he replied. They'll watch us forever. She leaned back into him. Then let them. Far below, the tide rolled in and out like breath. And within the walls of the palace, where secrets had once been buried in silence, love now moved without fear. The truth had not come easy. But it had come. And it had stayed. Thank you for watching till this extent. Do you think the prince made the right decision? Drop your comment and don't forget to subscribe.